The concept of death in Jujutsu Kaisen is the greatest form of character development. With a video like this tackling the concept of death, I believe it will be in order to say that there will be major manga spoilers. With the Jogo and Gojo death sequences, I can say that most characters undergo the most character development at the point of their deaths. So let's go over the thoughts running through the minds of several characters at the point of their deaths. Sorcerers basically have their character arcs fully completed at the point of their deaths, and so we'll be considering characters that undergo a change in mindset, or even those who discover something new about themselves. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, then by all means feel free to leave a like. What makes the idea of death very interesting in Jujutsu Kaisen is the way Gege uses visual elements to make the deaths feel more impactful. When Gojo met his end at the hands of Sukuna, we didn't just get to see him die, we got to see a different side of Gojo, the strongest, a side we didn't even know existed prior to this. Gojo, who for the longest time has been depicted with a high sense of pride and self-esteem, doesn't exactly die with his head held high. Gojo states that he's sorry he wasn't able to push Sukuna to give the match his all. At this moment, Gojo feels bad because he wasn't able to enable Sukuna push beyond his limits. I'll go into this more in a bit, but that's basically the kind of shift death is capable of bringing about. I have a bunch of death-induced changes I want to cover, and so I'll be alternating between high-end and low-end ones. Starting this on a high note, let's go over Jogo. Jogo, unlike the other members of the Disaster Cause family, had a very wonderful experience prior to death. But before what would be called the wonderful experience, Jogo got violated by Sukuna. And I know what you're thinking, this is a bad thing. But in this case, not exactly, because of what happens next. When Jogo stepped on to take Sukuna, nobody, and I mean nobody, was expecting Jogo to do anything of significance. But you know what? Jogo did the unexpected. He got Sukuna to acknowledge him. Sukuna, being revered across multiple eras, acknowledges this volcano head. So let's set the scene. After Jogo realized just how outmatched he was, he decides to use his course technique Maximum Meteor, this literally summoning a meteorite. After the initiation of the attack, Jogo says loudly that even Sukuna wouldn't survive that attack unscathed. And to this, Sukuna replies if it had hit. Sukuna questions Jogo on what he plans to do next. He asks why doesn't Jogo attempt to expand his domain. Jogo gives a response that honestly just disappoints Sukuna. Jogo states that he knows it would be ineffective against Sukuna, as if both their domains were to clash, then Sukuna would most likely come out the victor. Now let's pause and analyze what exactly is happening. Let's remember that this isn't exactly the same attributes and traits that Jogo had at the beginning of the series. When we first got introduced to Jogo and the rest of the disaster causes in season 1, we had a very rough idea of the personalities of all of them as cause spirits. Jogo came off as the overconfident one, and even now in season 2, he probably would still be as confident as he previously was if he hadn't fought Gojo back then. After his encounter with Gojo in season 1, his character drastically changed. He abandoned his overconfident persona. And let's not get this wrong, Jogo isn't exactly wrong for being overconfident. But what do I mean by that? The disaster causes are dubbed as special grades, and if you've been following Jujutsu Kaisen for a while now, you know that even among special grades, they are a bit on the high side in terms of power. When Jogo went into his fight with Gojo, he had no knowledge that a sorcerer could be that strong. This is also the very reason why Jogo didn't initially want to entertain Kenjaku's plan to seal Gojo, as he thought that he himself would be more than capable of taking on the sorcerer. And now in season 2, he has learned to acknowledge that he may be strong, but he isn't the strongest. He now knows that there are multiple people out there that might be able to pose a threat to him. And this is just wonderful writing on Gege's part, as I strongly believe that if Sukuna and Gojo's roles were reversed, the outcome would still be similar. In season 1 of the anime, Jogo expanded his domain first in an attempt to break through Gojo's infinity. If it was Sukuna he had encountered in season 1, he would have likely expanded his domain to make up for general stats, as we know that him and Sukuna are not nearly on the same level. Jogo would be expanding his domain in this case because he requires the amp the domain expansion grants your stats in general. And in the event that he expanded his domain against Sukuna, Sukuna would simply expand his to retaliate. And I don't think a domain clash between Coffin of the Iron Mountain and Malevolent Shrine would could be remotely close. And let's just say that this is exactly what happened in season 1. Jogo fought Sukuna and lost. If he were to face Gojo in Shibuya, then chances are Jogo would not make the mistake of expanding his domain. I hope you were able to understand the little analogy. Anyways, back to the canon fight between Sukuna and Jogo. When Sukuna and Jogo are done with their fire exchange, Jogo is seen in a different time space. This likely implying that Jogo is now deceased. We see him have a conversation with the deceased Hanami and Dagon. He tells them that he is sorry, feeling that he has failed, but they both cut him some slack. And while three of them are having a relatively touching moment, we see Sukuna in the very same time space somehow. Sukuna proceeds to explain Jogo's flaws. Anyways, later on during the course of this video, you understand that Sukuna does this a lot. Sukuna tells Jogo that he basically stunted his own growth, telling Jogo that he lacked the hunger to take hold of his desires. Sukuna then questionably compares Jogo to Gojo. He tells Jogo that he could have reached the heights of Satoru Gojo if he burnt everything to a cinder in order to achieve his goal, and Jogo agrees with this statement. After Jogo comes to accepting that this is the life he lived, out of supposedly nowhere, compliments start raining down. Sukuna states that compared to the others he fought 1,000 years, Jogo isn't that bad, and then he proceeds to land one of the most iconic lines in the whole series: "Stand proud, you are strong." Unfortunately, that line has been abused by the community, but if the line wasn't that iconic and impactful, then it wouldn't have been as popular. And as Jogo digests Sukuna's words, tears begin flowing from his eyes. He's baffled, and so he doesn't understand what is happening. He asks himself, "What's this?" And Sukuna, with a look of disgust, says, "Don't ask me." My interpretation of this scene goes as follows. I believe what triggered Jogo's tears was the fact that he got acknowledged by someone akin to a role model. Even in real life situations, I believe this is the exact reaction most of us would give if we were actually acknowledged by our role models. And that just goes to show a softer side to not just Jogo, but even to some degree Sukuna. Mai Zen'in is another one of the poor Jujutsu students that Gege was able to have his way with. Mai's introduction in season 1 does a very good job of showing us how nasty she is, not necessarily as a sorcerer, but rather as a sister. Mai despises her twin sister Maki. In the Jujutsu world, twins are seen as a taboo, a sign of bad luck. According to their father Ogi, when Maki and Mai were born, he couldn't inherit the position as the clan's head because he gave birth to, in quotes, capable offsprings, and so from birth Maki and Mai haven't really had much going for them. Maki, the older of the two, was born with a heavenly restriction, one that prevents her from having access to cost energy. Mai, on the other hand, actually has access to cost energy for a very limited amount. Mai's cost technique isn't also an efficient one, and so she's not able to even utilize the little cost energy that she has efficiently. Mai begins developing as a character in the exchange events. When she finally fought her sister Maki, we get to see her vent out the anger that she had been holding in for so long. At some point in their childhood and early teenage years in the Zen'in clan, Maki got tired of the ostracization. She decided to take things into her own hands. She goes up to the head of the clan, who at the time is now Mahito Zenin, and tells him of her plan to leave the clan and become a capable Jujutsu sorcerer. While Maki did this with no negative intent towards her sister, Maki's decision indirectly forced Mai to commit to the same mission, as they've done everything together prior to this point. Anyways, Maki defeats Mai in their little match in the exchange events, and after this, Mai asks Maki why did she leave. Maki brushes off the question, telling Mai that Mai also left and is currently now also at Jujutsu High. For context, this means that Maki is completely clueless. Mai tells Maki that she never wanted to be a Jujutsu sorcerer. She blames Maki for her position as a Jujutsu sorcerer. Maki always tried her best, forcing Mai to do the same. Mai says she was contented with being a servant. She wonders why didn't Maki feel the same. Maki replies Mai, telling her that if she had remained in that very position, then she would have hated herself. Maki apologizes, and it's just an all-round wholesome moment. This conversation between both sisters would basically serve as the pillar for Mai's development at the end of her life. We don't really get to see Mai undergo any more development until we get to the preparation arc. Maki finally visits home after quite some time, but staying true to her character, she's here for business and nothing less. She came to visit the Zen'in clan's cost tool inventory, but whatever plans she had for the cost tools were disregarded by her father. He cuts her down and throws her alongside her sister into a pit filled with multiple grade 2 cursed spirits and lower. Their father Ogi gives a speech about how much of a disappointment both his daughters are. He is seen supposedly letting out the anger that has been brewing inside him for quite some time now, very similar to the way Mai let off steam in season 1. And when he finished his speech, he left them both to meet their end. While both siblings are on the floor, Maki remains unconscious, but Mai gathers her strength and sits upright. She places her hand on Maki's chest just to find out that Maki is still alive. Mai says to herself that she isn't surprised. As she expected, Maki is tough. We see Mai doing what I won't exactly call a ritual, but it's a very interesting sequence of movements, after which we see both of them in the same dream space, very similar to what happened to Jogo in Shibuya. In the dream sequence, Mai explains her curse technique to Maki. She tells Maki that she's going to be making something special for her. She also states that because of her injuries, after she does this, she probably won't survive. Mai also explains that twins are inauspicious for sorcerers. She explains that in the world of Jujutsu, in order to gain something, you must offer something. In the same vein, suffering makes us stronger, but in their case as siblings, that rule doesn't apply. After all, curse techniques treat identical siblings as a single individual. And here another iconic line is dropped. Mai tells Maki, "You are me and I am you." She explains the way their bond works. She tells Maki that even if Maki works insanely hard because she wants to get stronger, there's really no point to that because she doesn't want to get stronger. As long as Mai is around, Maki will never develop. After saying that, Mai gives Maki a gift. She hands over the newly forged Soul Split Katana to Maki. Mai says she'll be taking away all the cursed energy with her, and in order to go out with a bang, she proceeds to drop another banger of a line. She tells Maki to promise her that she will destroy everything, and just like that, Mai's existence fades away. Within the span of roughly 100 chapters, Mai was able to develop from being a character whose sole defining attribute was the fact that she hated her elder twin sister, to being a character who is more than willing to risk her life for the sake of said sister. A very interesting thing I should point out with Maki is the fact that after Maki's awakening began, she looked down and said, "Mai, let's get started." Naoya has to be one of the best examples of a character that just doesn't want to die. Naoya was beaten as a human and then he came back as a curse womb. But even as a curse, being a curse womb wasn't just enough for him, and so he underwent metamorphosis and became a fully fledged curse, one that would undoubtedly be ranked as a special grade. I would love to say that Naoya develops like most of the other characters in this series, but that would just be untrue. But that's not to say Naoya doesn't develop. You see, the thing is, unlike the way most others develop progressively, Naoya just regresses the more time passes. Initially in his human form, he was just a not likable guy. He wasn't chill, but he wasn't messed up. Enter the Naoya that met Maki. He went from being bad to becoming messed up. Naoya could not stand the sight of Maki giving him Toji vibes. He just wasn't going to have that happen. To the point where Naoya's visual image of the strongest, being Toji and Gojo, gets clouded with Maki. Naoya has to outwardly say to Maki, but more importantly, remind himself that Maki is not Toji. He tells Maki that she's not the one that will stand with the strongest. He is the one who will be standing with them. And in my opinion, that's just serious insecurities, but okay. And after Maki defeats human Naoya in the Zen'in clan, she fails to kill him using her curse tool. However, Naoya is killed by Maki's mom using conventional means. This unfortunately is bad in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, because in Jujutsu Kaisen, when sorcerers are killed without cursed energy, they run the risk of coming back as a vengeful spirit. And this was exactly what happened with Naoya. Naoya came back to the story and now more messed up than ever before. I don't think I've ever seen any family feud harbor this much hatred for another family member. Like, let's not forget that Naoya and Maki are cousins, but Naoya doesn't seem to care about that information. He just sees Maki as an opponent, an obstacle, one that he has to overcome. One of the most Naoya things he does when he became a curse was triggering Maki. Naoya talks about how he's just that much mature than everyone, about how he's more of an adult than some people will ever be, and Maki attempts to piss him off, saying when was he ever the adult. Naoya, having his savage response ready to go, tells Maki Maki to ask Mai, and that for good reason pisses her off. The battle between the cousins continue, and Maki continues to understand her new body. She continues to awaken to understand just what she's truly capable of. And just when she's beating Naoya sees a silhouette of Toji standing beside Maki. This pisses him beyond imaginable comprehension. He says, and I quote, "The one who will stand there is me." At this point, he has transformed one more time, meaning as a curse, he had 3 different forms. He pulls out his domain expansion, and now with his new form, he has his face. For some reason, there's this smile, his signature smile that just offsets me. Anyways, Maki puts an end to him, and because of this, we get to see more on the Mai and Maki beat. Mai thanks Maki for destroying everything, and this seems to be the end of her character. But Naoya just couldn't stand the sentimental vibe and attempted to attack Maki again. Mind you, he's making this attempt while being injured. Maki cuts right through him, hopefully for good this time. I guess the moral of the story in this case is just be persistent enough. Toji Fushiguro, the Sorcerer Killer, was a human born into the Zen'in clan with a heavenly restriction, one that denied him access to cursed energy. Because of this, the Zen'in clan ostracized and violated him, abusing him in all manner of ways. The clan had their reasons for doing this. After all, they were one of the big 3 sorcerer families, and so something like this was a shame and an insult to everything they stand for. But their approach to this wasn't exactly the best, as their actions are what would go on to give rise to the Sorcerer Killer. We don't have much to explore with Toji's character, but that doesn't mean there isn't exploration to be done. When we first got introduced to Toji in the Hidden Inventory arc, all we knew about him at the time was that he was careful and dedicated. He does his research before undergoing any tasks. When he was assigned to take down the Star Plasma vessel, Toji did everything imaginable to make the mission accomplishable, said mission being something that very few characters in the entire series would be able to accomplish. Toji's process was simple: wear down Satoru Gojo and then strike. His plan proved to be effective, and he was able to do just that. He beat the strongest sorcerer. But what makes it fun is the fact that Toji lets Gojo win. Toji has been running this kind of show for quite some time now, and so you would think he knows a thing or two about reverse course technique. And sure, everybody knows Gojo didn't have RCT at the time, but being an assassin, and a thorough one at that, you shouldn't give room for error. And yes, Gojo was right when he said so. Toji should have gone for the head. If he did that, then he'd probably still be alive. But let's do a quick rewind. We know that Toji was doing his sorcerer killing business before he met Megumi's mother, and when he met her, he underwent a change. He stopped the business and started a family. But when he lost Megumi's mom, he spiraled back into the darkness and picked up from where he stopped. He discarded his son and his stepdaughter and left them to fend for themselves. But when it comes down to it, it's implied that he actually loves his son Megumi, and this is made more apparent at the time of his death. When Gojo made a donut out of Toji, Toji told Gojo about his son. He told Gojo that Gojo should do with the information as he pleases. But even before that, there is something more interesting for his character. Toji says all this while he thought his actions would only prove them wrong. The Zen'in clan, that is. He thought if he became good enough, they would have no choice but to acknowledge him. He thought killing Gojo would give him the respect he deserved. And all this while he has just been trying to lie to himself. In truth, he sees himself as exactly what they say he is: useless. Toji's character would have ended there in a sad but beautiful way, but a certain course technique wouldn't let the Sorcerer Killer rest in peace. Toji is reincarnated in the Shibuya incident arc. Here he's nothing but a vessel of carnage, a shell of his former self. This version of Toji simply destroys any and all things in its path. There is no more logic to it than just that. But here Toji has a well-deserved ending. He faces his son, and I would say he's proud of the sorcerer his son has become. Seeing that Gojo actually took on Megumi and not allowing Megumi to be taken in by his clan was probably the best thing that happened to Toji. Because if Megumi answered that his last name was Zenin and not Fushiguro, then Toji is killing his own son, no questions asked. But because Toji got the desired answer, he decided to leave it all behind and end himself. The end sequence of him not wanting his son in the clan, likely implying that he has moved on from the stupid notion of wanting his own clan to acknowledge him. It doesn't matter if the Zen'in clan sees him as what he is. All that matters is that he knows what he is. The two deceased death paintings, Eso and Kechizu, have what some people would consider an impactful death. And though they didn't have much time on screen, let's just see what we can make out of it. What makes their death at the very least remotely interesting is the flashback, where Choso says he will live for Eso will live for Kechizu, and Kechizu will live for him. When you think about that statement, and you think about the way Kechizu died, it can actually be painful, but I also know some people don't feel sober towards cursed spirits. Eso was in a very tough situation and he tried his best to take care of his brother, but he was unable to do just that. He tried retreating, but Yuji and Obara just wouldn't let that happen, and so he was also put in the grave. Now remember when Choso said they are all one, all three brothers? Well, that's where the character development comes in. You see, Eso and Kechizu didn't really develop much as characters because they were recently spawned into existence. However, Choso's character development on their behalf more than makes up for it. Choso originally planned on killing Nobara and Yuji, the two Jujutsu sorcerers who took down his brothers. Things seemed to be going smooth while he was taking on Yuji, but suddenly, a memory that did not exist, as the narrator said, saved Yuji's life. But that isn't exactly bad for the story. Choso begins to grow and better himself in order to protect his newly found brother, in order to avoid the mistakes he made with Eso and Kechizu. Eso and Kechizu were not prepared. As the elder brother, he shouldn't have let them take on more than what they could handle. But the perfect display of his development comes in his fight against Kenjaku. Choso comes to the acknowledgement of his mistakes with his brothers. He tells Kenjaku that irrespective of whatever Kenjaku might think, he and his brothers are in no way, shape or form failures. Kenjaku should keep such thoughts to himself. And after Choso acknowledges this about his past, we see him use the curse techniques of his deceased siblings, which was honestly very nice, especially since he was using it against his quote-unquote father. Choso was also acknowledged by Yuki, which is honestly a very big deal, since Yuki's Tsukumo is a special grade. Let's just touch on Yuki for a bit. When we first got introduced to Yuki in the Hidden Inventory arc, she is painted to be an irresponsible special grade, but when the world needed her the most, she showed just how responsible she could really be. She decided to help take on Kenjaku alongside Choso and Tengen, and even though they ultimately lost, Kenjaku acknowledged her at the very least. Kenjaku pointed out a flaw in her mindset. Kenjaku stated that she shouldn't have relied on Tengen. She should have had faith in her techniques as a sorcerer. She should have expanded her domain rather than rely on a simple domain. And I don't think Yuki died with much of a regret. And now later on, we see Choso and Yuji basically carrying on her legacy. Choso gives a book containing her life's work to Yuji, and I can't wait to see how they utilize it in the future. Nobara was one of the primary protagonists, at least at the beginning of the series, but things happen and some characters drop in relevance. But this isn't exactly the case with Nobara. It's more so that she has been put out of commission. We don't know whether she's alive or not, but let's just go over her anyway. Nobara starts out the series as this girly, shoppy, stereotypical character, but she doesn't choose to follow the stereotype strictly. In her debut episode, we see that she's capable of getting her hands dirty, and then by the time the exchange event rolls around, we see she and Momo have a clash of ideology, both of them believing in completely different things. I was definitely siding with Nobara, but that's besides the point. With the season finale, we get to see Nobara really push beyond the confines of her technique and push even her own physical limits, things I'm very sure early Nobara probably wouldn't have done. And of course, we have Nobara's flashback in season 1, finally having somewhat of a conclusion with the corresponding flashback in season 2. In season 1, it's explained that Nobara, someone who stayed in the countryside, made a friend out of someone who recently moved to the countryside from Tokyo, this friend being Sayori, but Sayori was chased by the villagers, and this honestly bugged Nobara. This is part of the reason she moved from the countryside to Tokyo. This story is then corroborated with the complementing story in Shibuya, and this time they include another friend, someone who wasn't part of the original story in season 1. This one was about the same age as Nobara. She even attended the same school. This secondary friend goes by the name Fumi. Fumi and Nobara actually came to Tokyo together, and they promised that the next time they will be meeting, they should make sure all three of them are present. And then we get a cutscene of Sayori's life in the city. After this, Nobara is seen apologizing to Fumi. She says she's sorry, but she can't make it this time. And before she passes out, she tells Yuji to tell everyone it wasn't so bad. Mind you, when she talked to Fumi, it was like in a dream sequence. Nobara definitely became a much more likable character with time, as upon introduction, a lot of people had beef with her character, but now that she's exiting, a lot of people feel real bad for her. Mekamaru is an example of a Jujutsu Kaisen character who had an expiration date. What do I mean by this? Well, nearing the end of his life, things started going a bit too good for him, and so Gege, being Gege, had already planned to walk Mekamaru out of the story. But that doesn't mean that his end wasn't impactful or good for the character. Mekamaru was born with a heavenly restriction, one that grants him what I would call an excess amount of cost energy, so much that his body can't handle. In exchange, his physical body is messed up. He technically has never been outside. Enough of that, as a Jujutsu sorcerer, Mekamaru uses cursed puppets in combat. He seemed like the guy who was always jealous of those who had what he didn't, and I can't blame him. Not being able to walk and do things a normal person could do is something a lot of people can't bear. Mekamaru fights Panda in the exchange events, and Panda proceeds to disgust Mekamaru so much. He tells Mekamaru that they are literally the same thing. I don't know about you, but being a human and having a doll tell me that would definitely piss me off. Anyways, they have their fight. Panda wins and he's able to express what he truly meant by that statement, and it comes off nice. Later on in the story, it's explained that there's a student working with curse spirits or possibly a curse user, and we find out that that is none other than Mekamaru. Mekamaru made a binding vow with the curse spirit Mahito. He'll give the curse information, and in exchange he'll have his body fixed. After both sides make true on their word, they plan on taking each other down. Mekamaru had a window to escape, but he chose not to use it. He knew that he had made a mistake and he wanted to correct it. He wanted to go back to Jujutsu High, telling everyone that he was a mole, but also letting everyone know that he had corrected his mistake. Unfortunately, he was unable to do that as he was bested by Mahito, but it was honestly neat to see him put in a lot of effort just to get to finally see and interact with his friends, and of course the one he supposedly loved. But Mahito just has to spoil the fun. But Mekamaru wasn't satisfied with his ending. He had multiple mini chatbots that were still operational. He used this in Shibuya to aid the gang in the little way he could. That on his own could be a personification of the fact that he's still lingering around, not wanting to move on, him not feeling like he has made up for the mistake that he made. He started out as a very bitter person, but I believe we can all agree that at the end he became so much more, and if he was able to get back home, then I have no doubt in my mind that they will accept him in open arms. Yoruzu is a calling game player from about 1000 years ago, the Heian era to be precise. She for some reason has romantic interest in Sukuna, and that seems to be the basis of her character. Unlike some of the other players, we never officially got a reason as to why she decided to come back as a calling game player, but it doesn't take us much to ascertain that she likely took whatever deal Kenjaku offered her because she wanted a chance to be with her lover. We don't have much flashbacks that feature Yoruzu, but what we do know is that the Heian era wasn't exactly kind to her. We saw Yoruzu attempt to make romantic gestures towards Sukuna, and he replies by using his curse technique to cut her, and for some reason she didn't get the gist that Sukuna wasn't interested. But where her development begins is in her new body in the present time. Yoruzu still seems for Sukuna, but she's dialed it back or up depending on how you view it. Yoruzu is willing to take actions into her own hands. Yoruzu and Sukuna begin having a conversation where they try to catch up as old friends. Maybe friends is not the right term. They talk about how Angel wasn't able to notice Sukuna's presence, and Yoruzu says unlike Angel, she knew it was Sukuna right from the start, and in her own words, that's because of love. Yoruzu says she wants to be the one to kill Sukuna, and she also wants him to be the one to kill her. This definitely seems creepy and disgusting, but let's take a step back to try to analyze what's going on. In the past, Yoruzu would likely not have objected anything Sukuna would say. In the past, Yoruzu made gestures and Sukuna did not reciprocate, but now she's putting Sukuna in a situation where he'll have to reciprocate. She's putting Sukuna in a situation where he'll have to show her his love. Be it sickening or not, that is development. She makes a counter offer anyways. She asks Sukuna what would happen if she won, but she kept him alive. What would she give him? And Sukuna simply responded everything with a very serious look. Sukuna says that it's unthinkable that he would lose, but if he does, defeat is no different than death. This is not one of those situations where you see people saying they rather die than lose. Here, Sukuna is saying that if he loses, then he's as good as dead. This just goes to show you the kind of characters Jujutsu Kaisen has. Sukuna tells Yoruzu that whatever she chooses to do with his corpses is left to her, and she blushingly blots out marriage. Sukuna seems unbothered and he says she should do as she likes. Yoruzu is beyond happy at this point, and she says that's a promise, right? No, make it create a binding vow, and after that she just begins fantasizing about how their marriage would go. I don't know about you, but she's actually thinking she stands a chance against Sukuna, which is funny, but okay, let her cope. Sukuna interrupts her and he begins attacking. He starts his assault using divine dogs from the 10 shadows curse technique. Yoruzu is furious. She wants to beat Sukuna, but she wants to beat him using his curse technique. No substitutes. She exclaims loudly that does he really plan on touching his future wife with a technique other than his own. She asks Sukuna whether he really thinks he can beat her without the use of shrine. They fight for a bit, and at this point Yoruzu is running out of energy. Sukuna says out loud that it's just like he thought, he wouldn't require the use of shrine, and Yoruzu asks whether this is truly all his love amounts to. She says she has much more to teach him about love, alongside the ultimate strength and solitude that love brings, and she says she's the only one that can teach Sukuna. Sukuna laughs it off and she wonders to herself, what could that possibly mean? She thinks to herself, does he already know about love? After which she exclaims loudly, that can't be love. She will show him what true love really is. She will construct and show him her heart. She says she wants Sukuna all to herself. His solitude should be hers and hers alone. At this point, Sukuna could honestly just give Yoruzu the same speech or a similar one to what he gave Kashimo. Yoruzu thinks she understands love, or at least Sukuna's version of love, but she, just like most others, doesn't exactly get it. She is being selfish, wanting Sukuna's love all for herself, because in Sukuna's words, the people they put down are granted an act of mercy by dying under his hands, and so Yoruzu wanting all that to herself is kind of selfish. She expands her domain, hoping to get this makes Sukuna take things seriously, but no, Sukuna still uses the 10 shadows, denying Yoruzu of shrine, denying Yoruzu of her request. Yoruzu is surprised. She said she didn't realize Sukuna knew her that well, and knowing that makes her happy. She gives Sukuna a gift and she tells Sukuna to think of it as her and always cherish it. This gift, of course, being what we later know to be Komotoke, the lightning curse tool. Yoruzu developed from being a character who sought acknowledgement to one who ultimately got acknowledged, though in a weird way. The expression Yoruzu gave after Sukuna explained that he had adapted to her technique was of pure joy. Tears rolled down her eyes. The man she has been trying to get to notice her for about 1,000 years finally did. Sukuna killed her. Sukuna showed her his love, and though they didn't get married and Sukuna didn't indulge her by using shrine, she was more than pleased with the results. Hajime Kashimo is one of the few characters who recently just met his end at the hands of the king, and with his death came self-discovery. Before the events of the recent manga chapters, there wasn't exactly much depth to Kashimo, but leave it to Sukuna to shed light on the psychology of Jujutsu sorcerers. When we initially got introduced to Kashimo, all we knew about him at the time was that he was a calling game player from 400 years ago, whose sole purpose at this point in his life is to fight Sukuna. Kashimo faces multiple further calling game players, and he's undoubtedly unimpressed with their performance. He only began seeing the potential of the present era when he fought a third-year Jujutsu high student who goes by the name Kinji Hakari. Hakari was able to impress and pressure Kashimo, but not to the point where Kashimo required to use his curse technique. Throughout their fights, Kashimo was able to remain true to himself. He avoided what would have been multiple temptations. There were multiple times in his fights with Hakari that pulling out his curse technique might have given him the advantage. But sorcerers from 400 years ago are unlike sorcerers of the present time. They value life and a lot of other modern principles in an entirely different way. What I'm getting at is basically this: if Hakari was going to kill Kashimo, then Kashimo would rather die than use his curse technique on a subpar opponent. That's just the mindset. But this wasn't nearly enough information on the character of Kashimo. We get a flashback where we see Kashimo standing above the bodies of multiple fallen opponents. It's implied that Kenjaku put those opponents up to it. From Kashimo and Kenjaku's dialogue, what I'm basically able to imply is this: Kashimo wants to fight a strong opponent, and he views Kenjaku as a strong opponent, but Kenjaku doesn't want to face Kashimo, and so he decides to take on the task of finding Kashimo's substitutes, people that in theory should be able to quench Kashimo's thirst for a proper battle. After Kashimo ends the disappointing sorcerers, he says he should have simply fought Kenjaku, but Kenjaku declines, stating that he's not fit for fighting, at least not not right now. Kenjaku offers him the chance to face Ryu Ishigori. Kenjaku hypes up Ryu, stating that Ryu as a sorcerer has the highest cost energy output in history. But hearing Kenjaku say that, Kashimo says that just sounds dubious to him. This line also very much implies that Kenjaku has been finding Kashimo strong opponents for quite some time now. And so two things are the case. One, Kashimo might just be that much stronger than whatever Ryu might possibly be capable of. Or two, this is not the first time Kenjaku has sold him this kind of hype. And with the most recent disappointment, he doesn't want to entertain any more of Kenjaku's suggestions. But knowing that Kenjaku has lived for quite a long period of time, and him being the curious guy that he is, he questions Kenjaku, who is the strongest sorcerer you know? And Kenjaku responds to this question saying that for the past 600 years, Romain Sukuna remains the strongest sorcerer he has ever encountered. And just like that, the name Sukuna sparks intrigue in the mind of Kashimo. Kashimo would go on to build a relatively unhealthy relationship with the name Sukuna. And I mean just the name, not the character. Kashimo doesn't do much, at least not up until the fight between Gojo and Sukuna commences. While the likes of Kusukabe, Higuruma, and Hakari do their best to explain everything that's going on, Kashimo, who is undoubtedly more experienced and likely more intellectual when it comes to these kinds of things, remains mute and observes. He only indulges us and talks once in a while, and the few lines of dialogue he has, he spends them praising Sukuna. He acknowledges how Sukuna is able to quickly adapt his technique, his fighting style, to suit whatever situation he is in. But Kashimo's character comes full circle when he actually finally comes in contact with the king. In Jujutsu Kaisen manga chapter 237, Kashimo rushes forward to take on an injured Sukuna. But despite how weakened Sukuna should theoretically be, Kashimo wasn't really getting much damage done, and so without hesitation, he chooses to activate his curse technique, the mythical beast Amber. The curse technique gives him speed and general stat boost. He's now seen faring far better against Sukuna and to some degree dominating. His moment is however cut short when Sukuna is seen fully reincarnated into his prime, his peak, his Heian era form. And this is where the glazing begins. In the words of the narrator, Kashimo saw Sukuna as perfection. After Sukuna transformed, he begins talking about how someone tried to teach him about love. This someone being none other than Yoruzu. Sukuna said that it would have been better if she tried preaching that to Kashimo or even Gojo. At this point, Sukuna just entered professor mode. Sukuna says that it's not that Gojo and Kashimo don't understand love, but it's that they can't understand. Sukuna shifts to just referring to Kashimo now. He tells Kashimo that many fierce fighters must have challenged him back in his day with all their strength and might, but still lost, and yet they never cursed you. And that's because they wanted your recognition so they could know their worth, but you butchered them, all while trying to treat others with care. And Sukuna wraps up his lesson saying, if that isn't kindness, then I don't know what is. Sukuna says others love us for our strength and we respond to that love. Sukuna points out that solitude troubles Kashimo. He says that Kashimo is greedy since he can't be contented with the love he has been offered. Kashimo asks Sukuna if Sukuna is satisfied. He asks Sukuna why did he become a cursed object to travel across the ages, and to that Sukuna responds that he understands love, and Sukuna says love is worthless. He's never needed anyone to satisfy him. He eats when he wants to eat, he plays when he wants to, and with whoever amuses him. He's also free to kill whoever is in his way. He lives as he will, and since no one else can grasp that, that's everyone else's problem. Kashimo, seemingly getting an answer he's contented with, asks doesn't that ever get old, and Sukuna simply replies no, it doesn't, as human life have a fleeting taste, which makes devouring them a perfect way to pass time up until his death. And that concludes the life of Kashimo. Something interesting to note is that this Sukuna and Kashimo's conversation on psychology and love took place in what I also characterize as another dream sequence, as the scene is reminiscent of where Kashimo and Kenjaku had their conversation 400 years ago. At the end of his life, Kashimo got the answer he was looking for. Kashimo died at an old age in his previous life, but he wasn't able to fully discover himself because nobody in that time period had the answers he required. It took meeting an expert in Sukuna for Kashimo to truly understand the way love and power interact. For Kashimo, this fight where he lost his life was very much different from the way Gojo lost his life, as Kashimo has been anticipating this fight for about 400 years. Granted, he must have been in a suspended triggered state. For Kashimo, his conversation with Kenjaku talking about how Sukuna was the strongest was a trailer, and his fight with Sukuna was the actual movie, the real deal. And in this case, the movie far surpassed his expectations. The movie more than answered the questions he had. Sukuna more than satisfied Kashimo's wishes, because in all honesty, if Kashimo had won that fight, then he might not have had the chance to get the lecture with Sukuna, meaning even though he would have beaten Sukuna in this case, he wouldn't have gotten the answers he needed. Ishiguro is a calling game player who set himself up to die, but that's not the point, I guess. Ishiguro is a sorcerer from the same time period as Kashimo. He's stated to be the sorcerer with the most cost energy output in all of history. Most people think his character is simply swag, but there's more to him that meets the eye. I won't say he's too complex, but he's not shallow. Ishiguro has this thing with food and sweet. I would say it's almost as if he can sense something with cost energy attributes. Whenever we do see him fight, he talks about how you should feel him, feel his hunger, quench his thirst. But why don't we start from the beginning with him? The very first time he uses any of these his signature descriptive words was when Yuta ran up to him in order to take him out as quick as possible. Here, Ishiguro described the move as sweet, and when Yuta's punch finally connected, he asks Yuta whether he expects that to fill up his stomach. He asks Yuta, do you tell a kid in front of a feast to calm down and eat slow? This is Ishiguro saying that Yuta isn't taking him as serious as he possibly can. Yuta could have hit Ishiguro with much more force. That's what Ishiguro is implying. He says in his first life he was a moderate eater. Obviously now he's implying he won't make that mistake twice. If he sees something sweet, he's going for it. This new change in his character is obviously part of what led to his downfall. He said in his life he has never had dessert and he wants to change that. Yuta continues attacking him and Ishiguro just says to himself, why am I unsatisfied? He questions himself and he comes to the conclusion that that's probably because he isn't full, at least not yet. Seeing that Yuta isn't doing enough, he asks Yuta if Yuta would be his dessert. That isn't creepy, don't think about the line too much, it's not that deep. And when Uro joins the fight, he calls her a pile of vomit, most likely implying that her strength level just pales in comparison to Yuta, and so that's why Yuta can be seen as sweet and Uro the opposite. Yuta pulls out Rika and Ryu get to boxing. After Ryu lands one punch on Rika, he says it looks like he still has an appetite. We get to the three-way domain expansion, and when all three expand their domains, Ryu says he has to make this short and sweet. Once again, he's thin with taste. After the domain expansions fail, he tells Uro that she isn't invited to his stable and he sends her flying with a granite blast, after which he then welcomes Yuta to his stable. Both Ryu and Yuta have a cost energy blast standoff, and something like this that's probably intense for both of them. We find Ryu saying this is too sweet. After their blast standoff, they switch to regular hand-to-hand combat, and this is when Ryu finally says this is dessert. He fires a granite blast at Yuta and Yuta redirects it using Thin Ice Breaker, and so Ryu gets hit with his own attack. He's on the floor and now he finally acknowledges that he is full. We don't get much from Sendai Colony up until Sukuna steps in. Immediately Sukuna entered the colony, Ryu sensed an aura that was way too sweet, at least in his own words. And I mean, if you've been following this Ryu's language, the sweeter something is, that probably means the stronger the opponent is, and so you would expect a logical person to hide or take shelter somewhere. But no, Ryu steps in the way of Sukuna. Sukuna asks whether he's going to scram or not, but rather than for him to accept the merciful act Sukuna granted him, he attempts to charge up his curse technique, and this is the point where he gets cut down for good. This is just something with sorcerers from 400 years ago. Survival isn't as important as the thrill of battle. Just like Kashimo, Ryu puts his life on the line, and I don't know whether dying to a stronger opponent is considered sweet, but that's just how things went. Principal Masamichi Yaga is one of the few characters in Jujutsu Kaisen we don't know an awful lot about. Anime only fans probably just know that he's the principal of Tokyo Jujutsu High and nothing more. But Yaga is actually a relatively deep character. We know from Hidden Inventory that he tries his possible best to serve as a very good principal and mentor figure to Jujutsu High and his students respectively. Yaga was really there for Gojo, and their dynamic really got to shine after Geto turned to the dark side. At that point, Gojo had no one to talk to, no one to go to, but his sensei came to his door to relieve him. Yaga offered Gojo wise words. Here we see Yaga is quick to retract statements, especially when when it's not right for the mood. Yaga asks Gojo why did he let Geto go, and Gojo answers the question with a question, asking his sensei whether he's seriously asking him that. Yaga says Gojo is right and he's sorry. At this point, Gojo honestly just needed affirmation, and he also asks a question with a stupidly obvious answer. Sensei, I'm strong, right? And Yaga answers the question, telling him yes, affirming what should already be a fact and not an opinion. If not for the context, Yaga would probably not have answered the question, but considering the mental states and everything Gojo is probably going through at this point in time, Yaga knew that his affirmation would be critical to helping Gojo in one way, shape or form, and so he does just that. Anyways, Yaga doesn't get much more development up until his death, but there are a few moments he's present in that do little things for his character. For example, when he interviewed Yuji, he was likely coming from a good place, as most of us already know. If I can cite an example, then I would say Yuji can be viewed in a similar vein as Haibara. Haibara's death weighed heavy on everyone at the time. Everyone had one or more reason to be blamed for his death. Nanami had his reasons, Geto had his reason, and of course their principal would definitely have his reason. Seeing another bright young individual willing to risk his life without knowing exactly what he's getting himself into wasn't something Yaga could stand for. Yaga had to make sure that Yuji was going to meet the criterias, and after a few sharp questions, he deemed Yuji worthy. Yaga also has his conversation with Panda in season 1, as well as his conversation with Gakuganji, the principal of Kyoto Jujutsu High. We see Yaga informing a baby Panda about his siblings. He tells Panda that Panda has 2 siblings within him. Panda rejects the notion, saying that isn't true, but rather than for Yaga to argue with the cute thing, he leaves the conversation, saying sooner or later Panda would understand. Fast forward to Shibuya, we see Yaga and Shoko share a scene. Shoko is a jujutsu doctor. She's capable of using RCT. RCT being the reverse cost technique, the positive form of cost energy that has healing properties. Yaga stationed himself with Shoko in case anything was to come up. After that happens, we leave both characters as they play catch up. At this point, we can cover his demise. The chapter Yaga is killed begins with the higher ups considering Yaga for promotion to special grade. They raise a few criteria that they believe he has to meet, and they also question him about how he made Panda. We see Gakuganji in particular asking him, does he truly not know how Panda was made? And Yaga responds saying he honestly doesn't. But the look on his face definitely implies that there is something he knows he isn't saying. We get a flashback where we see a younger Yaga and another cursed corpse. This particular cursed corpse actually has the soul of his son, and quite a few other cursed corpses are present here. Yaga hides the entirety of these cursed corpses from the rest of the Jujutsu world, and one night when he's heading to see his son, he is stopped by an assassin and principal Gakuganji. They give him an offer. Yaga either gives them the formula to produce a self-sustaining cursed corpse like Panda, or they'll have no choice but to kill him. And being what I guess is a noble man, he chooses the latter. But before his consciousness fades, he decides to give them the formula. Principal Gakuganji asks why tell him now? Why couldn't he have used it to save his skin? And Yaga simply tells him the most jujutsu thing to say. It's a curse from me to you. And with that, Yaga is no more. For the longest time, Yaga has been bound to the laws of the Jujutsu Society, always doing what the higher-ups requested of him. First with the Star Plasma vessel, then with the vessel for roaming sukuna. But nearing the end of his life, he decided to take choices and decisions into his own hands. The Jujutsu Society might have abused the formula if he gave them earlier, or maybe it's just a binding vow he made to make the technique effective. By this I mean Yaga could have probably restricted himself from talking about cursed corpses in that manner, but the condition being he can make it known at the point of his death. But of course it will come with consequences. That is also probably what he meant when he told Gakuganji that it's a curse from him to Gakuganji. It was nice that we didn't get to see a direct parallel of what he told Yuji back in the beginning of the series, because if we saw Yaga dying with regrets, then that would be bad for his character. And though you can technically count the fact that he didn't get to see his son one last time as something he will regret, the fact that he didn't verbally curse the Jujutsu system was a nice thing, despite the fact that he was assassinated. Taking a look at his face at the point of his death, among the emotions the panel conveys, regret is most certainly not one of them. Nanami is a confused sorcerer. Like, he was a student at Jujutsu High, he lost his best friend, and so he presumably left the institution just to find himself working with the institution in his later years. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just funny. I mean, Nanami himself says it pains him to have to work with Jujutsu High, but it's just something he has to do. Even better, the pay is more. Nanami's character in season 1 and season 2 is not really much different from what we saw in Hidden Inventory when he was a teenager. I'll just say that's the same character dialed up a bit. And for those of you who want to say season 2 includes Hidden Inventory, then please just don't be technical. A good point in the character of Nanami was when he was introduced to Yuji. Yuji reminded him so much of Haibara, a naive and optimistic friend he couldn't save. But Haibara was a colleague. Yuji, on the other hand, is more like a student. He didn't want to make the same mistake, and so Nanami did everything in his power to mentor and instruct Yuji on the right ways to handle certain situations. Granted, he was originally cold when handling Yuji in the beginning, but they rubbed off on each other and became close. Nanami finds himself evaluating his entire character, his entire life, when he gets trapped in the domain expansion of the special grade disaster caused spirit Mahito. Nanami is seen going back, evaluating a critical choice he made at a critical point in his life. The entire sequence is beautiful, and this is where we get to see what Yaga was referring to when he talks about Jujutsu sorcerers dying with regret. We see Nanami here calling out Jujutsu sorcerers. He says Jujutsu sorcerers are crap. They have to force their comrades to accept the notion that they must be willing to sacrifice their lives. If Nanami had died at this point in his life, then it's very much implied that he would be dying with regrets. But just after a flashback, this flashback mainly consisting of his time as a salary earner in a firm, Nanami comes to the conclusion that all that doesn't even matter. He has no regrets. And after admitting to the fact that he was ready to pass on the torch, Yuji saves him by breaking open Mahito's domain. The next major arc we can cover would be the Shibuya incident. We should probably start with the change in his behavior when he realized someone was targeting their assistants. This change became more apparent when he found Ijichi's body. After this, we are treated to the sequence of Nanami simply just bullying Haruta, and it was definitely worth it. Nanami's next big thing in Shibuya is in the Dagon fight, but nothing really happens for his character. Subsequently, he gets burnt by Jogo. Anyways, the next time we see Nanami, he encounters a swarm of transfigured humans. We get an insight on his thoughts. He plans to retire. He's thinking of a nice vacation spot. But of course, Gege being Gege, if a character is having such thoughts, then that means the character has had more than enough screen time. Anyways, he shifts his focus to transfigured humans. Despite the state that he's in, he can't stop thinking about his allies. He thinks to himself about going to help Naobito, Megumi, and Maki once he's done with this batch. After he's done with the transfigured humans, Mahito comes out of nowhere and places his hand on Nanami. Now we get to see a time space with Haibara present, and even though he's talking to himself, he says, "Haibara, what was I trying to do? I ran. Even though I ran away, I came back with the vague reason of somehow finding the job to be worthwhile." And at this moment, Itadori steps into the scene. It's implied that there's an off-panel discussion between Nanami and Haibara, but Nanami doesn't agree with whatever Haibara brought up. Nanami says to himself that that isn't right. He can't say that to Itadori. If he does that, then he'll just end up becoming a curse for him. And so Nanami simply says, "Itadori, you've got it from here," before he's blown up by Mahito. An interesting thing to note is that Nanami was considering regrets, despite the same Nanami claiming to have moved past his regrets. Definitely, human nature is evolving, so even though at the time he had no regrets, things would have come up and life isn't perfect, and so something new could give rise to a new reason for regrets. Anyways, Nanami's smile at the end of his life showed that at this point, more than anything, he had no regrets. He came from being this character who sort of overanalyzed everything to becoming a character who was fine with basic outcomes. Mind you, Nanami was never proud, but Team Nanami did have some sense of superiority. Like when Nanami broke the Black Flash record, he very much implied that it was luck-based and not of his own skill. His death served as a means of motivation to push the protagonist forward and the story at large. Geto is technically the very first villain and also the very first primary character to die in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, since Jujutsu Kaisen 0 came out before Jujutsu Kaisen properly began. But even before the Volume 0 movie, Geto was someone else. He was the best friend to everyone's favorite sensei, Satoru Gojo. Geto was the rival to the strongest. he was the strongest, or at least at the time. But unfortunately, life happened. What was once a beautiful friendship became nothing but a distant memory. Geto had decided the path he wanted to follow. His character shifted, and this was a realization he came to because of the interference of Yuki Tsukumo and Toji Zenin in his life. Geto was an upright character prior to getting violated by Toji, but everything changed for him after that beatdown. Geto changed from being the guy in the room who supports weaklings to being that one guy who doesn't want anything to do with monkeys. His character did a full 180, but even though some people would call Geto racist, at least he delivers his actions equally and fairly. When he was asked what would he do about his own parents, Geto unironically said he would take them out as well. He wouldn't spare them, as that would be unfair. Sparing non-sorcerers wouldn't allow him attain the world he desired, even if these non-sorcerers were his family, even if they were his parents. After he commits a few acts of murder, the Jujutsu system officially dubbed him as a curse user. Every sorcerer is informed of his status immediately. Most believe, but a few find it difficult to comprehend. Gojo just couldn't understand how his best friend could stoop so low. He couldn't understand what had become of Geto. In fact, he didn't want to believe that was Geto, and so he decided to meet up with him. After they meet up, Geto confirms the rumors, treating Gojo to a sight of the quote-unquote improved version of Geto. Gojo passes off Geto's plans. He disses the plans and says that they are unrealistic and unattainable, and Geto responds saying these plans would be attainable if it were you, right? After this, he drops an iconic and mentally taxing statement. Are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo, or you're Satoru Gojo because you're the strongest? And even watching it till now, the line still hits. And of course, with a line like that, Gojo was in shock, not having the proper response. This was the moment where him and his best friend broke up. Enter Volume 0. Geto has now fully embraced his other side. He's planning an event that will reshape the world, starting with Japan, the night parade of 100 demons. But all this is mostly just to cover up for his true plans. His plans being obtaining the special grade curse spirit Rika Orimoto. We all know the events that took place in the Volume 0 movie, so let's not dwell too much on it. Geto and Yuta begin their match, with Geto having the advantage at the beginning. But unfortunately for Geto, Yuta begins adapting and catching up. Yuta begins sharpening his fighting style, and when Geto notices how quick Yuta improves throughout their fights, he decides that it will be better for him to just end this as quick as possible. He gets ready to use his curse technique Maximum, the Maximum Uzumaki. Maximum Uzumaki combines all the curses in Geto's possession into one final attack, and in order to counter this, Yuta makes a binding vow with Rika. Exceeding the limits of his cost energy, Yuta counter attacks with a blast of his own, and after the collision, we see Geto's body banged up pretty badly. But this is where things get interesting. Instead of Geto to be thinking about how he literally almost just died, he thinks about a next time. He thinks about attaining Rika when he attempts it again. But unfortunately, his thought process is cut short by Gojo. Gojo also explains something that we might have not picked up on. Gojo knew that Geto would not kill up and coming sorcerers, as that would defeat the whole purpose of his plan, meaning that even though Geto is denying his humanity, he hasn't completely lost all of his humanity. And I'm very sure that if not for Jujutsu regulations, Gojo would have done everything in his power to save Geto. But let's go back to what Geto said. Next time, he'll make sure to acquire Rika Orimoto. This may unironically be a self-inflicted curse, meaning that Kenjaku might actually attempt to take Rika, but only time will tell. Anyways, the story of Suguru Geto just goes to show that not everyone can be saved. No matter how hard you try, death tends to be inescapable. Satoru Gojo as a character doesn't need much introduction, but Gojo as a character is actually one of the few with the most development so far, and that's probably because of the amount of screen time he has and the way it's supplemented with him being written out of the story. If we're looking at his development as a whole, then there's a lot to cover. Kid Gojo didn't really have much of a character, but if we had to label him with something, then I feel calling him bratty or entitled doesn't feel too far off. Gojo undergoes quite a lot of drastic changes in the series. When we are first introduced to Gojo in Hidden Inventory, he comes off as this once again bratty and entitled teenager, but at least now he actually has the power to back up his persona. Gojo in the Hidden Inventory would not stop talking about how he's the strongest all the time, of course not until he was humbled. Every situation that Teen Gojo gets the chance, every situation it seems relatively appropriate to use the term strongest, Teen Gojo would never squander an opportunity to use the phrase we are the strongest, and if that was his behavior throughout, then it would suck. But after his his awakening, his character began to shift. When he pulled up on Toji for the second time, prior to using Hollow Purple, he has this little monologue. He talks about everything feeling perfect and balanced, everything being just right. And of course, at this point, we get the most iconic panel in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. Throughout the heavens and the earth, I alone am the honored one. But even before Gojo does that, he alludes to a sense of selfishness. We, the readers and audience, are given an inside look as to what Gojo is thinking about right now. He says to himself in regards to Amanai that he's sorry. Right now, he's not even thinking about getting revenge for her. He's not even thinking about what Toji did to his friend. Gojo is thinking about how he's going to get back at Toji for messing him up. And after Gojo has his way with Toji, we get to see a newly realized version of the character. The phrase "we are the strongest" now becomes "I'm the strongest." Believe it or not, even though Teen Gojo doesn't use this phrase, hearing his older self say "I am the strongest" is far less annoying than hearing him say "we are the strongest." Don't worry, "I'm the strongest" just has a different feel to it. And if we move to season 1, we get to see Gojo do just that. Gojo has multiple moments in season 1 where he hammers down the notion of him being the strongest. In his first fight with Sukuna, his violation of Jogo, his use of Hollow Purple, every time he applied his ability, it was just majestic. And since we consumed the anime from season 1, the character at the time seemed flawless. Gojo moved past everything that happened in Hidden Inventory to become this seemingly perfect sorcerer and character. But Gojo's character arc wasn't completed. Gojo himself probably didn't think that there was more for him to discover. I mean, just a year prior, Gojo had taken down his best friend. You would think that his journey, his old life had been left behind. But no, Kenjaku just had to take the body of his best friend. And Kenjaku decided to put this body into good use. Kenjaku plans to use the body of Suguru Geto to aid him in executing his plan to seal the strongest. And he does just that. The sickest thing about Kenjaku's plan is the fact that he chooses to exploit Gojo's humanity multiple times. First by stationing the fight in a location with multiple humans, and then proceeding to stun Gojo with the face of his best friend in order to seal him in the prison realm. Before Gojo is sealed, he demands answers. He wants to get closure before he's possibly gone forever. He asks the course user, "Who exactly are you? Even though my 6 eyes registers you as Suguru Geto, my soul is rejecting the idea." Kenjaku reveals himself as the sick psychopathic person he is. He gives Gojo only a little insight on what's to come, and then he seals him away. With this covered, what was once the seemingly perfect character has once again been flawed. He now has to undergo character development. He has to move past this event in order to become a better sorcerer and character. Later down the line, the gang finds a way to unseal Gojo. The very first person this freed Gojo encounters is none other than Kenjaku, the man, or rather monster, that locked him away a while back. Gojo was ready to clear his name. He was ready to cut down Kenjaku and free his friend's body from this act. But Kenjaku is saved by Sukuna. After Sukuna steps in, Gojo and Sukuna fix a date for their bout. And this is where Gojo opts to make another mistake. Rather than for him to take down the king and Kenjaku, he chooses to postpone the event in hopes to take care of other things, this being a decision that will come to bite him in the future. There is a 1-month time skip and we don't exactly know what Gojo did in this month. It's presumably training, but there could be more to it, and depending on some of the possible new information we might get as regards to this time skip, then Gojo's decision to take on Sukuna at a later date might not exactly have been a flaw. And since it's all fights from here on for Gojo, he doesn't get much development done, at least not until he becomes the divided one. We get a dream sequence following Gojo's death. He's met with a lot of fallen past allies, and this is where his character comes full circle. Geto asks him how was the king of curses, and Gojo responds saying he was crazy strong, but the thing is he wasn't able to go all out, implying Gojo couldn't push Sukuna enough to give it his all. Gojo then acknowledges his opponent in a way he has never done before. He said he's not even sure he could have beaten Sukuna, even if Sukuna didn't have the 10 shadows. Even though this statement brings about controversy in the JJK fandom, we all have to acknowledge the fact that Gojo is admitting inferiority, something that earlier versions of him probably wouldn't have done. Geto is also surprised, saying he must have been crazy strong to make Gojo admit something like that. Geto then adds, saying he feels sorry for Sukuna, and to that, Gojo responds saying more than anyone, he understands the sheer magnitude of the solitude that comes with being the strongest. Gojo said he wanted to convey everything to Sukuna. He wanted Sukuna to know and understand understand. He continues saying it was fun, but Sukuna wasn't able to give it his all, and for that he is sorry. Nanami and Haibara pull up to join the conversation, and this becomes very emotional for Gojo, and a lot of Gojo's other fallen comrades join the conversation. Gojo needed this moment with his fallen allies, because prior to now we haven't really seen him grieve his loss. He tried pushing forward without acknowledging the past. Nanami died in Shibuya because of a mistake he made. His sensei was also ultimately killed because of him, but when he came back, he didn't want to accept the fact that they were truly gone. He wanted to focus on his fight with Sukuna and ignore everything else, but seeing them all at this point in his life, or in this case his death, was basically all he needed to become that perfect character once again. He gets Sukuna's acknowledgement as well, but this doesn't do much for his character. After all, at this point he's already dead. Sukuna tells him, or at least the corpse and us the audience, that he was magnificent. Sukuna says that for as long as he will live, he will never forget Satoru Gojo, but hopefully that shouldn't mean much, as we are expecting Sukuna dead very soon, hopefully, I guess. And this time Gojo doesn't say he's leaving it to anyone else like he did in Shibuya. When the process of sealing Gojo was initiated, mere moments before he became subject to the prison realm, he stated that he's leaving it up to Yuta, Yuji and the likes, leaving something up to them, meaning that he still has to linger around. But now he's gone. He knows they know what to do. There is no need for him to point it out. He has to let things go and move on to the next chapter. The way Gege implements death alongside his writing would make the death sequence of complex characters like Sukuna and Kenjaku all the more interesting. If you reach this point in the video, then you very much notice that Gege uses a time dream sequence a lot, but it never feels repetitive because Gege implements it in an entirely different way than the way he used it previously. Sukuna also played a massive role in the deaths of most of these characters, and so seeing his own little sequence would be quite interesting. If this wasn't exactly what you were expecting from the title, then my apologies, but I feel like to appreciate the character development of majority of these characters, you have to be looking at it from how much death and the death sequence changes them. I hope I was able to do a good job with this video. Which of these sequences was your favorite, and which did you feel was the most impactful? I could do a follow-up video depending on how this video does. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, then feel free to leave a like. If you have something to say, then you can put it in the comments, and if you want to see more videos like this in the future, then please feel free to subscribe.